Hello, I'm Greg with Brownlow Rights. Today we're going to be talking about how the wind affects your 100-yard zero. I've always been an advocate of zeroing my rifles, especially my center fires, at 100 yards due to the fact that it insulates you from the environmental effects to at least some degree. But it doesn't completely insulate you from those effects. And today we're going to demonstrate that. Now, we're out here today on a pretty normal South Dakota day, conditions that if you're going to be a rifleman here, you definitely have to learn how to shoot in. And that is a 12 to 18 mile an hour wind. It's pretty normal for this area. And I have a 22 BRA here that I am just doing some fire forming with. And obviously the fire forming loads, they shoot pretty good, all things considered. And we're going to take a look at how the wind, this condition right now, the wind is basically blowing from 10:30 to maybe 11 o'clock, and it's from 12 gusting up to probably 16 or 18 miles an hour. Pretty steady, all things considered. And I want to demonstrate this for you guys, how much your 100-yard zero is affected by the environmental condition. And a lot of you might not shoot in winds that are as strong as those here in South Dakota very frequently, but many of you are probably dealing with a 5 to 10 mile an hour wind pretty regularly. And it's important that you understand your 100-yard zero is affected by the environmental condition. A lot of you probably think that you can horsepower your way through this problem, and I'm here to tell you that you cannot. Getting a proper 100-yard zero in a condition other than flat, dead calm, and I mean less than 2 miles an hour or something like that, if you're shooting small enough, you're absolutely going to have to learn how to do this to avoid your zero changing from one range session to the next. Now, I'm sure that's something that a lot of you have already experienced, where you'll be out at the range shooting and you'll get a perfect zero. And then you come back the next day and you'll find that your zero has shifted by 1/10 of a mil, and you don't know why. And so you fix it, and then you come back the next day and it's shifted again by 1/10 of a mil, and you don't know why. Well, I'll explain to you today at least some of the effects that are attributing to this problem. This is a Kestrel 5700 Elite. Actually, it's a 5700X. Now, many of you are familiar with this. You've seen it here on this channel before. And what it is a sensor pack built in with a ballistic firing solution calculation software, applied ballistics. And it's important that when we're doing these kinds of things, trying to zero our rifles in an outside windy condition, that we have a ballistic firing solver. That's what they call the little program that does the math inside here. We'll call that a ballistic solver. And it's important that we use one that calculates for all of the variables that are most important to getting this no wind zero. And that is the ability to calculate aerodynamic jump. For those of you not familiar with this, that means you haven't been watching very closely on my channel. Aerodynamic jump is an effect that dictates, based on the twist of your rifling in your barrel, so the direction that the bullet is spinning, and the prevailing wind condition, whether it's coming from the right to the left or coming from the left to the right, there will be a vertical element to your wind call. We need a solver that will actually compute for aerodynamic jump, and applied ballistics is a solver that computes for this. So as I put my profile in here in the Kestrel, and it computes for aerodynamic jump, I can have it tell me, if I set the range to 100 yards, which is the distance that I'm shooting at, I can have it tell me what my firing solution should be in the condition that I'm shooting. And at a 12 mile an hour, 1030 wind, it says that I should be coming up 1/10 of a mil, and it says that I should be coming left 1 to 0.17, depending on the velocity. Now, aerodynamic jump is only calculated for wind speed number 1 in the Kestrel. Wind speed number 2, it doesn't use that wind speed to calculate aerodynamic jump. I have a right twist barrel on this rifle, which means my spin is to the right or clockwise. And that right twist profile will cause the bullets in flight to spin right twist as well. And that condition is going to allow a left to right. That means a wind that is blowing from the left to the right, or what you would refer to as maybe a 9 o'clock wind. That left to right wind will cause the projectile to fall. It'll basically fall down away from the direction of its spin. Conversely, if the wind is coming from right to left, then it will climb up that wind. Now, there's lots of ways to visualize this stuff, folks, and I'm not saying for sure that that's the correct way you should be visualizing this, but the long and short of it is that a wind coming from the right in a right twist barrel will cause your round to impact high if you don't account for this. If it's coming from the left in a right twist barrel, it'll cause your round to hit low. Now, it's important you understand that the aerodynamic jump effect doesn't only count if you're dealing with a 9 o'clock or 3 o'clock or otherwise full value condition. This effect is no matter if the wind is coming just marginally out of the left, something like 11:30 o'clock, or if it's coming marginally from the right. There is a elevation factor to your wind call regardless if it's coming left to right or right to left by any appreciable margin. It could be the same thing down at 5:30 or 6:30. Bottom line, if this wind is off axis, if you can look through your optic and you see a left to right condition in the mirage at all, well then this is a factor. The more intensity that the wind has, the higher velocity of the wind, the more the effect. And then to boot, the lower ballistic coefficient of your bullet, the higher of effect it's going to have. So the worse your bullet is at flying through the atmosphere, as evidenced by a very high drag or a low ballistic coefficient, the more aerodynamic jump is going to be a factor. So here with a relatively sporty 22 caliber centerfire, it's only affecting things by about 1/10. However, if we consider something like a 17 HMR with a very low ballistic coefficient, well, the aerodynamic jump effect is going to be increased dramatically. Now, the same thing goes. A lot of you are probably thinking, well, then I should be able to horsepower my way through this problem. Well, no, not really. Not in an appreciable way. Because if you run the numbers here on a 7mm or 30 caliber with a high ballistic coefficient, because of the condition that we're in here, being a 12 to 15, 16 mile an hour standard wind, that is still enough wind, even when it's only 1030, it's not even full value. That is still enough wind to create a very significant problem and a perceptible point of impact shift if you're shooting small enough. Now, folks, this advice that I give on this channel is mostly for people that are able to shoot well inside of 0.2 of a mil and can easily resolve a 1/10 of a mil shift in their point of impact. A lot of you have rifle systems and ammunition or perhaps skill sets where you can't shoot to a 1/10 of a mil. And I understand how this would be fairly irrelevant for you guys, but it certainly is something that you should consider and think about. Well, the wind is pretty wild out there, so we're going to attempt to demonstrate this, but I'm making no guarantees. Even at 100 yards, this kind of condition will blow a 1/10 of a mil of error into your zero. So it's better to zero on a calm day, folks. But a lot of times, especially if you're prepping for a hunt and you're limited on time, you won't be able to. So you need to make sure that this tracks. So we're going to just fire a few shots here at 100 yards. I'm going to see if I can't hold some groups with this fire-forming ammo here, and we'll see if we can demonstrate the effect. So the first few shots here, I'm going to just hold the center of the dot. I'm not going to hold what this thing recommends. Okay, as expected, it hit to the right on the target. Now I'm going to try to actually hit the dot. So I'm going to hold the solution that it's calling for in an attempt to get my groups centered up. All right. I thought it was calm there, but apparently it wasn't. Yeah, now you can feel the gust hit us up here. So, this is how much this has an effect, folks, is the difference between the valley and the peak. I needed to hold a little more. Let me try that again. Yeah, that's a little better there. You can see here, when you're playing with aerodynamic jump in your zero, it's important to understand that these effects are here, folks. These things are real. Now, if I hadn't held, and toward the end there, I was holding a full 1/10 of a mil of elevation, and I was holding a 1/10, about another 20th almost of a mil. Because as the wind vector changes and gets to more of a full value, you're going to have to hold more of that wind call, the horizontal element of the wind. And then as the wind starts changing and wrapping around, there's more of a vertical element to the wind also. So if you want to keep your groups centered up on your actual point of aim and have your point of impact match, well then you're going to have to learn about how to use a piece of software like that, or in this case, a piece of hardware combined with a piece of software, a ballistic solver, that does compute for aerodynamic jump. Because these effects are very easy to demonstrate here. This effect is something that's causing a lot of you to chase your tail all over the place. And every time you pick up your rifle, it seems like you've got a different zero. And when you're shooting at distance, if you're not accounting for aerodynamic jump, this is accounting for a fair amount of your misses if your target is small enough. Because if we're shooting a nearly 12 o'clock or nearly 6 o'clock condition, and folks, we almost never have a truly 12 o'clock or a truly 6 o'clock condition. There's always a left and right element in it. And that's why there's such poor conditions to shoot in. 12 and 6 is the worst that I could imagine for shooting in. And I know that's contrary to what a lot of you believe. But it is due to this exact effect, how we just don't have enough information here. We can't see the difference or feel the difference as readily as we could if it was coming steadily from one or the other sides, a strong left to right or a strong right to left. I would rather shoot in a 3 o'clock 20 mile an hour wind than a 6 o'clock 5 mile an hour wind. The fact is, a strong wind from a constant direction is going to be easier to shoot through than a calm wind that is constantly switching. And that is because of this vertical element that aerodynamic jump adds. Now let me show you what this looks like in the extreme. Now this is part of the reason why this is so important to understand, is because when it's calm, folks, lots of people can make hits. When it's windy, all of a sudden everybody really struggles and they have a hard time hitting anything. Here's what it looks like in a 5 o'clock wind, but 30 miles an hour. Now, if I take and change this thing from 5 o'clock to 7 o'clock, that's 4/10 of a mil of elevation error that we just picked up in this solution. And folks, this is with a 7 Norma Mag improved, running a Berger 195 at 3100. Most of you aren't running around with something that has that kind of ballistic authority. So trust me when I say, this is not something that you can horsepower through. I've said it 5 times in this video at least. I'm saying it again now. You can't fix this with ballistic superiority. This is a real effect that affects every single thing that you're shooting, and it's probably causing you misses. When that wind switches from just barely left to right to just barely right to left, it can bring with it a severe vertical penalty. because even if the wind is super calm, and I mean 5 or 6 or 8 miles an hour, going from marginally left to right to marginally right to left is still going to bring with it up 2/10 or more of error into your firing solution. If you're not accounting for it, if your software doesn't account for it, you're going to be missing. Well, summer is definitely here. It's like 85 degrees outside. I really don't like that stuff. I would prefer it to be negative 85 versus 85. Okay, so aerodynamic jump, it's a real thing. And yes, at 100 yards, even at 100 yards, I don't care what you're shooting, the wind does affect your zero, and aerodynamic jump is an effect. And folks, this is not something that you can horsepower your way out of. This is a very real effect. I don't care what you're shooting. Now, to give you some idea of what I'm talking about here, this is a 7 Norma Mag improved running a 195 grain EOL, Berger Extreme Outer Limits 195 at 3,100 foot per second, folks. As you can see, it is still calling for 1/10 of a mil, both horizontal and elevation correction here in this wind condition. Now, the Applied Ballistics app that I just showed you is on the App Store in both Google and so your Android stuff as well as your iOS or Apple stuff. And it does account for aerodynamic jump. And so those of you that are not running a Kestrel, which I would strongly encourage you to get, and we try to keep a few of those things in stock from time to time. And the Kestrel is the best there is, folks, because it combines your sensor pack to collect all of this information along with the ballistic solver, the Applied Ballistic solver. So if you're looking to get a true no wind zero, you're going to need to account for this. I know this comes as a shock to you guys, but if you're trying to get zeroed at 100 yards properly, you're going to have to use a long-range ballistic solver in order to get it done in anything other than the calmest possible condition. Now, folks, even with the 7 Norma Mag improved, look what I have to drop this thing down to. I've got to drop it down to 4 miles an hour before the correction is not needed anymore. But as soon as I bump it back up to 5 miles an hour, now we've got our correction back again. So in anything but the flat, dead, calm condition, you're going to need to account for this wind direction, also creating a vertical element if you plan to get a very precise zero. And this is not just for those of you that are shooting really small either, because having a 1/10 of a mil error baked into all of your ballistic firing solutions is going to create a problem no matter how small you're shooting. There's going to be a percentage of your shots that you're going to miss as a result of this, because the very center of the prediction is not where it's supposed to be. So those of you that are chasing around a 1/10 of a mil here or there at range, this affects you also. Because if your zero is not exactly what it's supposed to be, then none of the ballistic solvers are going to be able to account for that, and you'll be a 1/10 of a mil off from 100 yards to all the way out at distance. I know this is bordering on super, super obvious, but I think I probably should make it clear to you at this point that if you're zeroing at 100 yards, you want to make sure that the bullet is impacting the target opposite what the ballistic solver is calling for. So if the ballistic solver at 100 yards is telling you that you need to come up 1/10 of a mil and you need to come left 1/10 or 2/10 of a mil, then you're looking for your bullet impact to actually be opposite of that. So you're looking for a 1/10 low and 1 or 2/10 right in that instance. Now, conversely, if you're just shooting at 100 yards and you're just shooting to try to hit very precisely on the target, well, then you would hold or dial exactly what the firing solution is calling for. But if you haven't previously zeroed and used this knowledge to zero, well, then when you try to apply your hold, it's going to be all messed up, isn't it? So in order for any of this to work, first you need to zero using this method. And so the optimal place, if we have a firing solution that says I need to come up 1/10 and left 1/10, well, then I should be looking for my bullets to fall 1/10 low and 1/10 right. And if I zero in that condition, then when I go to shoot in any condition in the future, I can use my ballistic solver to tell me exactly where I should be holding or dialing to get a dead center perfect hit. Our scripture reading today comes from Ephesians chapter 2, and we'll just start right at the top. And it reads, now this is Paul that is sending this letter again to Ephesus. I think Ephesus is how you say this city, and that's a part of what would be modern-day Turkey, I believe. And he had done a ministry there before, I think lived for something like 3 years with them and cared for them greatly. And so this is a letter that Paul is writing to the Ephesians. And he says here, once you were dead because of your disobedience and your many sins. You used to live in sin, just like the rest of the world, obeying the devil, the commander of the powers in the unseen world. He is the spirit at work in the hearts of those who refuse to obey God. All of us used to live that way, following the passionate desires and inclinations of our sinful nature. By our very nature, we were subject to God's anger, just like everyone else. So Paul here is basically giving an account of what once was, in that they were once dead because of our disobedience. And so this shines a light on the fact that our relationship with God is indeed dependent on our choices. It's dependent on our actions here. Because it said you were dead because of your disobedience and many sins. So what that means is if we are going to be engaging in sin, then we are essentially dead. We cannot be alive because life is Jesus Christ. And Jesus Christ is sinless. Jesus Christ is holy. And because of this, we are dead. And so your choices here every single day have something to do with this. It says you used to live in sin just like the rest of the world, obeying the devil, the commander of powers in the unseen world. So acknowledging here what part the devil has to play in this. And it says how we used to live in sin, but those of us that are saved, those of us that have come to live our life in concert with what Jesus would ask us to do, we are alive, but we are no longer living in sin. And as a result, we do not obey the devil. We do not obey the commander of powers in the unseen world. And here it says, he is the spirit at work in the hearts of those who refuse to obey God. So this entire structure of this is laying out the groundwork that says, hey, you can't do both here, folks. You're either going to choose sin or you're going to choose Jesus. And if you're not choosing Jesus, well then by that very nature, by that definition, you are choosing sin. And it says here that the devil's spirit will be at work in your heart. Now, I'm sure that's something that you could all relate to, because when you're dealing with sinful people, oftentimes you will find that their sinful works often follow in their sinful lives that are being directed by this commander of the unseen powers, the devil, that dwells within their hearts. And this is how we begin to see some of the structure take shape of just exactly how we're supposed to use our judgment to stay away from sinful people, to make sure that we are doing everything that we can do to be a right example for those sinful people to follow. But, hey, the devil is at work here. It's not just these people. The devil is at work in their hearts. And so we have to be very cautious of that. And Paul gives a lot of weight here to the passionate desires and inclinations of the sinful nature. And so that's it. Basically saying, hey, our nature is sinful. And it's important you understand that, because left to our own devices, without any encouragement to be better, without any relationship with Jesus and God, and any relationship with the Spirit or His Word, we will fall to our sinful nature. And so it's an act of obedience in order to stay out of the sinful nature, to steal our hearts back from the control of Satan and give our hearts control to Jesus. And the last verse is very powerful because it says, by our very nature, we were subject to God's anger, just like everyone else. And so the differentiation here is that when we are alive in Christ, then we are not subject to God's anger. God has no reason to be upset with us because we're choosing rightly. We're choosing to go with Jesus. We're choosing to put down and push down our sinful nature. We're choosing to pursue those things that are greatest for us. This takes a lot of shapes in the outward behavior of people, a lot of things that they don't think are maybe tied to the sinful nature. There's a distinction here between everyone else and the people, the Ephesians that Paul is speaking to here. And those people that Paul is speaking to are good, godly people. And they are in service of Jesus. They're spreading the good news. And so they stand apart because of their actions. And this is one of the very many places in the Bible where it is described to us that our behavior and our adherence to the proper way of doing things, the proper way of life as described in the Bible, is what separates us from those people that are not, and those types of actions that would draw God's anger. Now, it is a massive misperception, and probably more so amongst Christians than it is in non-Christians, in the sense that people often think that Christians are supposed to just let anything slide. We're supposed to just, as long as we've chosen Jesus, now I guess we can do whatever we want. And the Bible is actually just slammed full in the New Testament even of all the different things that we're supposed to be doing and all of the different things that we're not supposed to be doing. And it ties those things very plainly together. And it says, hey, if you're doing these things, then Jesus will not know you. And he says specifically in several places that you will never join him in his kingdom if you're engaged in doing those unright and bad things. So just because we choose Jesus, that's not any miraculous feat here, folks. The fact that he chose us, that's the big thing. That's what we're supposed to be so thankful for. And in order to show our gratitude properly, and in order to secure our continued life with him, and to stay away from the death that sin brings with it, we are supposed to conduct ourselves in very specific ways. And that means, hey, we don't have to wait around here for people to give us our approval. We need to behave in such a way that guarantees that Jesus, God, the Spirit are in approval of us, and that's the only thing that matters. Well, thank you for joining me today. I hope you've enjoyed this message, and if you haven't been doing this already, folks, I would strongly encourage you to pick up a Bible and read that thing daily. There's some pretty important guidelines for how you're supposed to live your life in there. For those of you out there that don't have a Bible, why don't you just give me a call? Give the phone number on my website a call, and we'll see if we can get you a Bible of your very own if you don't already have one. God bless you, and we'll see you next time.